So this is very quick. We have exactly half an hour. We have 8 amazing speakers who are representatives of their companies. So we're going to do a sort of very, very quick Q&A. I'm going to ask some questions, they're going to answer, and then if we have any time at the end, we'll take some questions. Otherwise, please follow them in the lunch break. We've got 4 new people on the panel now. So we've got Tandy from Polymetal there, we've got Rob Simmons from Ferexpo, and online we've got Denis Alyoshin from Ukrainian lithium mining, and also Nathan Williams from MineSpider, as well as Eugene and Ali, who were here before, and Yuba online. I think we've got you, and Barry. So I'm going to kick off. So this session is about trying to understand all the things we've talked about so far in the day, and how these companies are navigating these geopolitical risks, economic risks, issues. And we'll start with Ukraine, obviously, being the sort of the most critical area that we need to understand. And Denis manages this company in Ukraine that's mining lithium pegmatites. And maybe just a question for you, Denis, is really how do you navigate, how do you mine, explore, develop in Ukraine currently, given everything that's going on?
Hello everyone. Thank you guys for giving me a chance to have a speech here. So basically, it's been already quite a while since the war started. So it's a bit cynical to say that, but A, we have adopted to it, and B, probably, in those times, it's better to be a junior miner than to be an operating construction site or an operating production site because of all of the risks related to the war itself. So basically, we have part of our team now abroad, and we have part of our team now still in Ukraine. Obviously, we are on our development path, right? So we have received the production license from the government. We are the only production license so far in Ukraine out of 3 lithium deposits. But we are on our development pace. We are currently in the midst of our PFS process. We are doing metallurgical tests in 4 different geographies. We are having consultants in like 6 different geographies. So myself, physically, I'm now located for this couple of months in Budapest, basically flying around, overseeing things that are happening abroad. We have part of the team that are still in Ukraine, and we now have to be, let's say, addressing the things that we never had to address before. Just to give you a very practical example, we now have around 800 to 1,000 kilograms of core samples left. We need much more for our tests, and especially for the pilot plant that shall come into play in whatever 8 to 10 months. So basically, I'm now stuck with the task of A, purchasing drill rigs, B, training people in Turkey, C, bringing them somehow into Ukraine, and operating drill rigs on my own, right? Basically to make sure that we will have the amount of core that is required. Again, I have to say that being a junior miner, we are kind of okay for now because we are just going through the tests, through the med tests, etc. We are trying to secure the team that is in Ukraine. Basically, that means just keeping them not in the office probably. Now we have more risks related to the electricity blackouts than to actual missile strikes. Then basically the major business risk and business uncertainty is that no one knows how long the war will last and how long we will have to be adopting to this situation. So that's it pretty much.
Okay, thanks very much, Denis. That, in a nutshell, that's how you're managing. I guess to move on rapidly, unfortunately, Rob, you are at the different end of the spectrum, a very significant miner and processor and infrastructure company. How are you coping with the war and everything that's going on?
So Richard, we operate 3 large-scale iron ore mines in central Ukraine and have been largely in operation since the start of the war. I think the key point to make here is we're operating in an environment that changes every single day. So whilst you think you're set for that particular day or period that you're in, the rules of the game can change at any given time. So all about being adaptable and evolving to the situation. Different phases of the war, you'll find yourself talking about different things. So for us, as a bulk commodity producer, it's all about getting the key consumables in. on a regular and timely basis, and it's also key to have the logistics to get your product back to market. So for us, diesel, electricity, natural gas, obviously the topic of the moment in Ukraine is electricity, and that's the thing that is preventing us from currently producing. We are fortunate that we do have stockpiles of product and therefore are able to continue to ship product to market. So moving on from that, it's a key to have constructive relationships with your stakeholders. That might be shareholders here in London, it might be customers around the world, and they understand the situation that you're in. And we're very fortunate that we have very good relationships with customers that we've had for 30, 40, 50 years in some cases. So maintaining that, you also have the listing here in London and ensuring that we communicate with them with disease. And with that effective communication, I think I'll leave it there and say if anyone has any questions, I'll be lunchable for afterwards.
I guess just a very short question. Are your operations directly in the firing line in terms of missiles and shells?
No, I think there's probably two phases of the war. There's pre-October, where the front line was very much the focus of the conflicts, and then post-October, when the Russians began to use missiles against the Ukrainian national grid for electricity, and that's the phase of the war that has had the greatest impact. We haven't seen any fighting on the ground in the region where we're operating, let alone at our operations.
Thanks, Rob. So now, sort of moving from the direct war's impact to all the other regions, all the countries in the region that are all suffering in different ways or impacted in different ways by this. So we move to Ali, who's represents a TSX listed company in Mongolia, which we sandwiched between, as we all know, between Russia in the north and China in the south, and we've got a country that's sanctioned broadly by the West, and we've got a country that's still sort of in lockdown and quite restrictive. So Ali, how are you managing some of these? You're not producing, but you're exploring and developing. How are you managing supply chain, investor confidence, these type of things, where you are?
Yeah, it's certainly been trying with respect to providing investor confidence for various reasons. As of course the border to the south with China, for instance, has been not only locked down, but it has faced a fair bit of backlash. As a result, it's difficult to get products or chemicals into the country. With Ion Energy, we are, of course, an early exploration company, much like the gentleman who was speaking from Ukraine. And we are drilling. That equipment exists in country. You have necessary access to skilled labor in country, so you're not so much impacted by that. I touched on it briefly during my presentation, but I think it's important for investors, be it either in Europe or in the Americas or Canada or wherever they may be, to recognize Mongolia's importance as a buffer state that is very much influenced by powers that be external of Russia and China. And so as a result of the various investment that comes in from these nations other than the Chinese or the Russians, it does hold a sense of neutrality. It continues to remain rather attractive, and I think we've seen now that additional investors from various regions of the world continue to step up and come into Mongolia. So there is value there. It is a difficult conversation to have, but again, when I speak with an audience such as this, the Eurasian context is a little more clear to the audience as opposed to individuals perhaps that are in Canada. Hopefully that answers your question, but happy to have a chat later if anybody has any questions as well.
Okay, thanks, Ali. That's very useful. Yeah. So, Tanya, I guess your company's got to navigate a lot of other similar sort of issues around supply chains and investor confidence. How is Polymetal managing with mines in Kazakhstan and Russia, delivering on all your ESG commitments and climate change commitments?
ESG is clearly not at the top of agendas for many mining companies now facing circumstances. Polymetal is, and it's been disclosed to the market that we're in the process of splitting the company. So what we use from the experience of being a London-listed company is that we've been reporting against ESG framework in London for 3 years. We were one of the first companies who started reporting under TCFD, and we continue to do so. What we're doing, we're using our experience and focusing much more on Kazakhstan, because Kazakhstan is not as advanced as some other countries with the ESG agenda, and we are using our experience to help our Kazakh operations to move much faster through the process than they could do previously. Later, there's going to be a session with our with the person working in Kazakhstan who is doing a lot of work on bringing electric vehicles, for example, to the operations. Also, we are participating, and again, probably a lot of you know that there are a lot of conferences happening at the moment in Kazakhstan because ESG is it's becoming very prominent over there, and again, polymetal is moving very much towards the east and towards Asia, especially countries in the area. So yes, experience of being in London is very helpful in this regard, and we are trying our best to develop our Kazakhstan and ESG interests.
And do you find that the new subsoil code and the ESG enclosure requirements in that, is it putting a lot of pressure on you in Kazakhstan to change very, very rapidly, or do you have the ability to?
Not really, because again, we've been FTSE 100 company for quite some time, so we are very much used to scrutiny, and we are ahead of so many other players in the area. So there is any scrutiny that we have, we're still ahead of what is developed over in Kazakhstan. So we are, again, like our employees are participating in the conference and bringing the knowledge into Kazakhstan, and our hope is that we will be able to progress much faster than we probably were planning.
Great, good news. Thanks, Tony. Now we're going to go remotely now to Barry. Barry, is Barry still on? He dropped off. Okay, well that's fine. That's fine, because that means we've got all the type of questions hopefully. So welcome to Nathan at MineSpider. You're sitting behind me there, so I can't really see you. So your company involves traceability and blockchain technology to increase traceability of minerals. Question from me is that is this pressure coming from the end users, or are you like the car companies, people like that, or the mining companies actively pursuing this? Are you seeing requests from a broad range of people in that? And also, we hear a lot from the majors about this type of thing. Is it the mid-tier companies and our big companies, or the smaller companies in Central Asia getting involved in this and contacting you about this type of technology?
Yeah, if you would have asked me about 3 or 4 years ago, I would have told you all of the pressure is coming from downstream buyers, automotive or electronics companies for traceability. But what we saw over the past few years, especially during the pandemic, has been a shift towards much more proactive upstream. Usually the reasons and the pressure for change is coming from a need for increased trust. So either from government, which like increased regulations, sometimes for geopolitical means, because you've got companies trying to and industry trying to secure their supply of critical metals, and so countries trying to support their supply of critical metals. We see it in Europe, we see it in the US, trying to forge relationships with Africa, with Asia, with South America. But then, on the other hand, you'll find much more proactivity for traceability from companies because it's part of their ESG plan. So wanting to to gain trust from customers, to get material across borders, to have a more streamlined view of their company as being technologically adapting, and especially to show off their ESG progress. A lot of companies are making much more investment into ESG nowadays, and they don't want just their immediate customers to see it, but their customers' customers, or perhaps as far as traders, and to try and leverage on being connected and being in the supply chain of well-known brands. When they're seen as a trustworthy source of material for well-known brands, when you can calculate on seeing that you've got a bit of a knowledge of their carbon emissions that have been tracked, and you've got a starting point for getting a hold of your ESG as a downstream company, it is a much more collaborative process in the supply chain. And so we're seeing companies try and make progress in this in order to be able to either charge premiums or just to be able to get more investor confidence or more customer confidence.
So I think what you're saying is that the trend is definitely up from all areas coming together to try and build traceability and provenance into products.
Yeah. And it's not just the majors either. Like a lot of the requests are coming from younger companies, smaller companies, mid-tier miners, as well as players along the chain that are interested in. They sort of see the writing on the wall and they want to get ahead of it. They want to say, okay, well, we're not just buying and selling anonymous metal. We want to be part of the future of supply chains, because there is coming an integration as more and more companies are trying to vertically integrate in order to create these circular supply flows. And traceability is definitely an important part of that.
And you get a sense that that's in the forefront of producers in Central Asia as well, or?
Absolutely. I mean, it's coming from all over, but what you see in Central Asia is a need to differentiate their products from places where there may be sort of geopolitical questions, like with the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, and when you see sort of tensions around China versus the US, that when you've got Central Asian producers being able to say, hey, our material comes from thus and such source, and here's the information that you have on it, it gives a competitive advantage.
Sure. Thanks. Okay. Thanks, Nathan. So we have a little bit of time to talk to get some perspectives from Eugene and Luba, who's patiently waiting there. I think starting with you, Eugene, I think you've given us a really good outline of the transition of Navoi complex and what you're planning to do over the years. Of course, the other point that you made is that you're looking to do an IPO in 25, 26. And I guess maybe my question is, how do you manage that transition, given that all the requirements that you'll need from external stakeholders, investors, potential investors, to get over the line, in the next sort of 3, 4, 5 years?
Thanks, Richard. Of course, the current geopolitical developments that we observe do have an impact on us, even though Uzbekistan is far away from the center. But for example, our traditional logistical routes and supply chains have been adversely affected by this situation. And we have been forced to look into other options, which of course are more costly, and put an additional pressure on our cost-cutting measures. And we had to adapt to the situation quite rapidly. However, I must say that what's in our favor is that we do have quite substantial spectrum of products that we produce internally in-house, ranging from mill liners and many other things that we use in our operations. And that's helping us to kind of protect ourselves from all these vulnerabilities that are happening globally. However, as I said, we are affected by this, and we do have an action plan of de-risking our supply chain from what's going on right now. In terms of ESG, one of the questions, our ESG agenda, we currently we're meeting all the local requirements, but as we transition to IPO, and we must also meet global requirements, global expectation in this regards. And this has been the challenge that we've been addressing. We are, for example, we have developed a robust program to address the lost time injuries, to ensure that our employees are safe, to ensure that we have zero tolerance for fatalities, and we have a target. We have established a target, a lost time injury target that we are going to meet by the end of this year, next year. And then we understand that these are the investors' expectations. We already, as I mentioned during my presentation, we already are using external financing from syndicate banks, global banks, and we already feel that expectation. We must, even though we're not still far away from becoming a listed company, we already see the expectations that external stakeholders have towards us. And this is giving us time to calibrate, to focus on areas of improvement. So by the time we do come to the stock exchange, it will be completely.
Great, thanks very much. Yeah, there's a lot to do, isn't there? And maybe just on that, just you guys, since you sat there patiently, as part of that transformation, you talked about the mineral endowment of the Navoy mining complex and the huge amounts of resources. How do you feel business is working towards building that portfolio of resources and ultimately reserves that you will be able to put out there in the market and get the sort of value that stakeholders and the owners want, but is acceptable really to sort of investors as you move into this new phase?
We have started this program already last year, and we have well understood what needs to be done. So it's not just one of a sudden when IPO was announced, and we immediately started. So even not last year, the audit itself, the first audit of mineral resources has been done first in 2020. And from that moment, it became quite well understood what should be done. And as I mentioned before, geomechanics, hydrogeology, mining studies, confirmatory drilling, additional drilling, all that has been started that day and just becoming more and more active from that moment. And this year we had a very big program, and next year the target is much bigger. So more volumes of drilling, more volumes of studies. We are planning to do lots of re-estimation of mineral resources and reserves, and we really own very good assets. They are well known. We have a long history of mining for them, so there is no doubt that the gold is there. We just need to confirm, and we know how to do that, that the future is the same as the past, or it's different, but we know how to do it, what to do with it. So I think we have, we have a big, strong resource base, and we are feeling ourselves quite comfortable and ready to present ourselves to the world starting from next year.
Okay, thanks. And I guess one of the problems, it's a problem and a blessing, is that you have such a large resource base that doing updates, doing exploration requires a lot of resources, a lot of planning, a lot of equipment. Are you finding that just the sheer size of those sorts of programs is a problem given the supply chains you've got? reliance on equipment, perhaps from Russia, where you would have got that before, and you're looking at alternatives?
Well, for many of our activities, we have to use subcontractors. So we have our in-house exploration company, or like own exploration company, but it fulfills a small part of our needs. We have our own laboratories. We have our own processing, not processing facilities, but processing laboratories. So we have in-house, but it's definitely not enough. That's why we are involving subcontractors for all kinds of studies, for target generation, for exploration, for laboratory analytics. And lots of companies are now already came to Uzbekistan or are planning to come to Uzbekistan. So I very much hope that they will help us to realize or to make our plans to come true.
Thank you. And yeah, and it's great to hear about Network. We really appreciate you and Evgeny giving us that presentation. So I've got 3 minutes left, according to Arthur, which is partly due to the fact that I've had very brief and very pithy, insightful comments from the panel. So I have time for some questions. We have time for some questions for our 7 panelists. Any questions?
Surely.
Well,
Why are we here?
sorry. Yes.
Produce independent consultant. A number of the presenters today mentioned, as you have in this session, ESG being driven by London listings or the stock market. I wonder whether, and my question to you is a London listing an advantage or a disadvantage? Because in Central Asia, I think we've seen mining companies get a London listing, then leave. I've been sufficiently close to them to wonder why they left. It was because of the pressure for ESG kinds of things which they find they can't afford or don't want to afford.
Thanks. And I guess I'm going to get Tanya to answer that because Tanya has done a lot of this, obviously.
So London listing is primarily access to the money. So there's no doubt about that. If you need to be listed in London, you are doing this to either to get an exit at the point of the IPO or to do both exit for the original owners plus to attract some additional funds. Also, being a London-listed company gives you access to cheaper bank money because if you are a listed company, you have all the disclosures, you have all governance, ESG, everything in place, so you are going to be like a proper corporate citizen in the world of other mining companies. So there is nothing like dodgy going on in your company. Saying that if the company doesn't get this benefit of having access to the cheaper money, there is pretty much not that much reason of doing extra compliance. So there is a balance for the company to choose whether they want this, and obviously like benefit comes with some like strings attached. So, and being like good corporate citizen is very important for like so many companies. So you are not doing it just for the money, just a good thing to be a good company. And as experience of some companies shows that it pays a lot, gives a lot of credit for the investors, for the employees. It's nice to work for a nice company. So yes, London listing comes with some additional compliance requirements, but we believe there is a very big benefit in proper disclosure, proper governance, proper ESG practices in the company because it makes the company a better corporate citizen.
Yes, thanks, Tanya. And Rob as well.
I mean, just briefly, I think, as what Tanya said, I think it's about building a brand, and London listing is part of that. So if you want to build a brand that customers in Japan know and understand, and you've got to build that brand, you've got to go down the disclosure pathway. But if you go on that pathway, then you end up at a place that's better than where you were before. And if you're reaching a much broader audience of stakeholders, and we're talking about people in Ukraine who understand what Forexpo is because of the disclosures, but you've also got customers around the world, investors here, listening to you because you have a brand that you trust in, and people trust in the stock exchange and the disclosures that are required as a part of it. So as part of building a bigger picture, it's broadening your audience and developing that relationship with a wider audience of stakeholders.
Richard, do you mind if I weigh in on that?
Yes, please, because it applies.
Yeah, I'll be quick, but I think, Polymetal and Ferrexpo are, of course, part of the FTSE 100 or rather large companies that can afford the fees that the AIM or the LSE would charge junior miners such as myself to be listed there. So you mentioned whether or not listing in London is an impediment or is it something that we're looking to leave as an ideology. I think last year around this time when I was here for Mines and Money, we considered dual listing on the AIM. Having looked at the costs associated with NEDs, nomads, and various other costs that you do incur, for junior miners, we believe that it is not in the best interest of the company to list on AIM or the LSE purely because the capital that we would spend on these regulatory issues of the nomads and the NEDs could ultimately be spent on the ground to de-risk our assets. And I think that's why we were reluctant to come to the AIM or the LSE, and we will continue to be reluctant until we are, of course, in the same agreement or scale as my colleagues here to my left. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. Yeah, very good point. Yeah. Any other questions? Or are we getting hungry? I think we're getting hungry, Arthur. Thanks, everybody. That's been really great. I could have had this discussion for a good hour and a half, I'm sure, and everybody could have expanded on their areas because it's so fascinating about what's happening and how it's affecting what's going on with the mining industry in this region. But thanks, everybody, and thanks for diving in, Dennis and Nathan and Ruba, for hosting the relation week. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.